Commander Sarah Mitchell stood at the bridge of the USS Valiant, watching the morning sun paint the Pacific Ocean in shades of gold and crimson. The radio crackled to life, breaking the peaceful silence that had settled over the destroyer's command center. She had been expecting this call for weeks, ever since intelligence reports started flooding in about unusual enemy submarine activity in the South China Sea. "Valiant Actual, this is Fleet Command," came the stern voice of Admiral Reynolds. Sarah straightened her shoulders, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. The crew around her fell silent, sensing the gravity of the moment. Petty Officer Jackson turned from his radar station, his young face showing the same tension that gripped everyone on the bridge. "Fleet Command, this is Valiant Actual. Go ahead," Sarah responded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins. She had commanded the Valiant for 2 years, through training exercises and diplomatic missions, but she could feel that this was different. The weight of command had never felt heavier than in this moment. The Admiral's next words were measured and deliberate. "Commander Mitchell, you are hereby ordered to proceed to grid reference Delta 7 Alpha immediately. Intelligence indicates a critical threat to merchant shipping lanes. Time is of the essence." Sarah glanced at her navigation officer, Lieutenant Commander Torres, who was already pulling up the coordinates on the digital chart table. "Sir, what kind of threat are we dealing with?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The shipping lanes in that sector had been reporting strange sonar contacts for days, and 3 cargo vessels had gone silent in the past week. The implications were becoming clear, and none of them were good. "Hostile submarine activity, Commander. Multiple contacts. Your orders are to neutralize the threat and secure the shipping lanes." The Admiral paused, and Sarah could hear the weight of responsibility in his voice. "Commander Mitchell, Fleet Command gives you a single word: engage." The radio went silent, leaving only the hum of the ship's engines and the gentle sound of waves against the hull. Sarah felt the eyes of her crew upon her, waiting for orders that would send them into harm's way. She had trained for this moment her entire career, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of leading her people into combat. "Helm set course for Delta 7 Alpha. Flank speed," Sarah commanded, her voice carrying across the bridge with authority. "All departments, general quarters. This is not a drill." The ship immediately transformed as alarm bells rang throughout the vessel, and crew members rushed to their battle stations. Lieutenant Commander Torres moved to Sarah's side as the navigation plot updated their course. "Ma'am, at current speed, we'll reach the target area in 6 hours. Should I coordinate with the other destroyers in our task force?" Sarah nodded, knowing that they wouldn't be going into this fight alone, but also understanding that the Valiant would likely be the first to engage. As the ship picked up speed, cutting through the increasingly choppy waters, Sarah thought about the intelligence briefings she had received over the past month. Enemy submarines had been increasingly bold in their attacks on civilian shipping, using new stealth technology that made them difficult to detect until it was too late. The international community was demanding action, and it appeared that action was about to come. Petty Officer Jackson called out from his station, "Ma'am, I'm picking up distress signals from the merchant vessel Atlantic Pioneer. They're reporting torpedo tracks in the water." Sarah's blood ran cold. They were still 4 hours away from the grid reference, but the enemy was already active, already claiming victims. "Can we raise them on communications?" Sarah asked, moving to the radio station. The communications officer shook his head grimly. "Negative, ma'am. The signal just went dead." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, knowing that somewhere ahead of them, sailors and merchant marines were fighting for their lives, if they were still alive at all. The next few hours passed with agonizing slowness as the Valiant raced toward the combat zone. Reports continued to filter in from Fleet Command about additional attacks, and Sarah began to understand the scope of the threat they were facing. This wasn't just one rogue submarine. It was a coordinated attack on the vital shipping lanes that kept international commerce flowing. As they approached the target area, the weather began to deteriorate. Dark clouds gathered overhead and the wind picked up, causing the destroyer to pitch and roll in the increasingly heavy seas. Sarah knew that the rough conditions would make their job more difficult, but they might also provide cover for their approach. "Sonar contact!" shouted Petty Officer Rodriguez from the sonar station. "Bearing 320. Range 12,000 yards. Submerged contact, moving at high speed. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she realized they had found their quarry. But she also knew that if they could detect the submarine, it was likely that the submarine could detect them as well. "Weapons, prepare for engagement," Sarah ordered, moving to the tactical display. "But hold fire until I give the command. Let's see what we're dealing with first." She watched as the sonar contact moved across the screen, its course taking it directly toward a group of merchant vessels that were desperately trying to reach the safety of the nearest port. Lieutenant Commander Torres studied the tactical situation and looked up at Sarah with concern. "Ma'am, at their current speed and heading, they'll intercept the merchant convoy in less than 30 minutes. We need to act now if we're going to prevent another attack." Sarah nodded, knowing that the moment of decision had arrived. The bridge fell silent except for the steady ping of the sonar and the sound of the storm growing stronger outside. Sarah looked around at her crew, seeing determination mixed with apprehension in their faces. These were good people, trained professionals who trusted her to make the right decisions. She couldn't let them down, and she couldn't let those merchant sailors die. "All stations report ready for combat," came the voice of her executive officer, Commander Blake, over the intercom. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would commit them all to a course of action that would change their lives forever. The weight of command had never felt more real than in this moment. Standing on the bridge of her ship, as it raced toward an engagement that would test everything she had learned about leadership and warfare. As lightning flashed across the darkening sky and thunder rolled over the churning seas, Sarah prepared to give the orders that would send her ship and crew into battle. The enemy submarine was out there, stalking innocent civilians, and it was her job to stop them. Fleet Command had given her one word, and now it was time to act on it. "Sonar, maintain contact on that submarine," Sarah commanded. "Weapons, stand by for my order." The tension on the bridge was palpable, as everyone waited for the moment when peaceful patrol would transform into deadly combat. In the distance, merchant ships continued their desperate race for safety, unaware that their salvation or destruction hung in the balance of the decisions being made aboard the USS Valiant. The USS Valiant cut through the storm-tossed waters like a steel knife, her crew focused intently on their instruments as they tracked the enemy submarine. Commander Sarah Mitchell studied the sonar display, watching as the hostile contact moved steadily toward the merchant convoy that was still 25 miles ahead. The storm that had seemed like such a problem was now working in their favor, masking their approach and giving them the element of surprise. "Contact is maintaining course and speed," reported Petty Officer Rodriguez from the sonar station, "still heading directly for the convoy. I'm also picking up what might be a second contact, very faint, bearing 045. Sarah's heart sank as she realized they might be facing more than one submarine. The tactical situation was becoming more complex by the minute. Lieutenant Commander Torres moved to the chart table, quickly plotting the intercept course. "Ma'am, if we maintain current speed and heading, we can position ourselves between the submarine and the convoy in 18 minutes. But if there's a second submarine out there, we might be walking into a trap." Sarah nodded, understanding the dilemma they faced. Protect the convoy and risk being caught between two enemy submarines, or hang back and let innocent civilians die. The decision was no decision at all. "We continue on intercept course," Sarah announced. "Alert the convoy to the threat and advise them to scatter. Individual ships have a better chance than staying bunched together." She turned to her communications officer. "Send a priority message to Fleet Command. Inform them we have multiple submarine contacts and request immediate backup." As the Valiant closed the distance to the enemy, the storm continued to intensify. Rain lashed the bridge windows, and the ship rolled heavily in the mounting seas. But the crew remained focused on their tasks, each person understanding that the lives of dozens of merchant sailors depended on their performance in the next few minutes. "Ma'am, we're receiving a response from the merchant vessel Carolina Star," announced the communications officer. "They acknowledge the threat warning and are beginning evasive maneuvers. The other ships in the convoy are following suit." Sarah felt a small measure of relief knowing that the civilians were at least aware of the danger and taking action to protect themselves. Suddenly, the sonar operator called out urgently, "Contact 1 has increased speed and changed bearing. They're turning toward us." Sarah realized that their approach had been detected, and the submarine was now maneuvering to engage the Valiant directly. The hunter had become the hunted in the space of a few seconds. "Battle stations torpedo," Sarah commanded. "Flood torpedo tubes 1 and 2. Throughout the ship, sailors rushed to their combat positions, their training taking over as they prepared for the engagement that everyone knew was coming. The sound of watertight doors slamming shut echoed through the vessel as the crew sealed the ship for battle. Lieutenant Commander Blake, the executive officer, appeared on the bridge, his face grim but determined. "All departments report ready for combat, Captain. Damage control teams are standing by, and medical has prepared casualty stations." Sarah acknowledged the report with a nod, grateful for the professionalism of her crew, but hoping desperately that the medical preparations would not be needed. "Torpedo in the water!" screamed Rodriguez from the sonar station, bearing 315 high-speed screws, heading directly for us. Sarah felt time slow down as she processed the information. The enemy submarine had fired first, and now a torpedo was racing through the water toward the Valiant at over 40 knots. "Emergency, turn to starboard." "All ahead flank," Sarah shouted. "Deploy countermeasures." The ship heeled sharply to the right as the helmsman spun the wheel, while sailors launched acoustic decoys designed to confuse the incoming torpedo's guidance system. The next few minutes would determine whether they lived or died. The bridge crew held their breath as the sonar tracked the incoming torpedo. "It's closing fast," Rodriguez reported, his voice tight with concentration. "Range 5,000 yards and decreasing." Sarah gripped the rail, knowing that there was nothing more she could do except trust in her ship, her crew, and their preparation. 4,000 yards, 3,000. It's turning toward the decoys. Rodriguez's voice carried a note of hope. "The torpedo is pursuing the countermeasures." A collective sigh of relief went up from the bridge crew, but Sarah knew this was just the beginning of the engagement. The enemy submarine was still out there, and it would undoubtedly try again. "Bring us around to bearing 280, Sarah ordered. "We need to get a firing solution on that submarine before it can reload and fire again." The Valiant's advanced sonar systems were working overtime trying to penetrate the storm noise and the submarine's stealth technology to maintain contact with their adversary. As the destroyer maneuvered for position, Rodriguez called out another contact report. "Ma'am, I'm now showing definite confirmation on that second submarine. Bearing 070, range 8,000 yards, moving to flank our position." Sarah realized that her worst fears were being confirmed. They were facing a coordinated attack by multiple submarines. "This is a Wolfpack operation," she said to Torres. "They're trying to catch us in a crossfire." She quickly evaluated their options, knowing that conventional tactics might not be enough against multiple adversaries with the advantages of stealth and surprise. The storm that was providing them cover was also making it difficult to track the enemy submarines accurately. "Contact 1 is turning away," Rodriguez reported. "They're opening the range, probably trying to reload for another torpedo attack." Sarah understood the submarine's tactics: fire, evade, reload, and fire again. But she also knew that this gave her an opportunity to press the attack before the submarine could bring its weapons to bear again. "Fire control, do you have a firing solution on Contact 1? Sarah asked. The weapons officer studied his instruments carefully before responding. "Marginal solution, ma'am. The storm is interfering with our sonar tracking, and the target is maneuvering aggressively. Probability of hit is estimated at 40%. Sarah weighed the odds quickly. A 40% chance was not ideal, but waiting might give the submarine time to reload and fire again, or allow the second submarine to get into position for its own attack. "Fire tube 1, she commanded. "Set for active homing, enable at 3,000 yards. The Valiant shuddered slightly as the torpedo was ejected from its tube and began its deadly journey through the storm-tossed waters. Sarah watched the weapons display as their torpedo raced toward the enemy submarine, knowing that the next few minutes would determine the outcome of this phase of the battle. "Our torpedo is running hot, straight, and normal," reported the weapons officer. "Time to target 4 minutes 30 seconds. Sarah turned her attention to the second submarine, which was continuing to close on their position. She needed to deal with the immediate threat while their first torpedo was still in the water. "Helm, come left to 060, Sarah ordered. "We need to keep both contacts on our port side where we can engage them with our torpedo tubes." The ship responded to her commands, but Sarah could feel the storm fighting against their maneuvers, making precise navigation difficult. Suddenly, Rodriguez's voice cut through the bridge chatter. "Multiple explosions bearing 315. Our torpedo has detonated." Sarah felt a surge of hope, but she needed confirmation of the kill. "Any sign of the submarine surfacing or breaking up?" she asked. The sonar operator listened intently to his equipment before shaking his head. "Negative, ma'am. I think we may have hit a decoy, or the torpedo detonated prematurely." The realization that their first attack had failed hit the bridge crew hard, but Sarah knew there was no time for disappointment. The second submarine was still approaching, and Contact 1 was likely reloading for another attack. The battle was far from over, and the stakes were getting higher by the minute. "Load tubes 3 and 4, Sarah commanded, "and prepare a full spread for firing. We need to end this quickly before they can coordinate another attack." As her crew worked frantically to reload the torpedo tubes, Sarah studied the tactical display, looking for any advantage she could exploit in the deadly game of cat and mouse that was unfolding beneath the storm-lashed surface of the Pacific Ocean. The USS Valiant fought against the mountainous waves as Commander Sarah Mitchell prepared for what she knew would be the decisive engagement. The storm had reached its full fury, with winds howling across the destroyer's superstructure and rain hammering the bridge windows like bullets. But beneath the chaos of the storm, an even deadlier battle was taking shape as 2 enemy submarines maneuvered for position to destroy her ship. "Contact 2 is accelerating," reported Petty Officer Rodriguez, his voice tight with concentration as he tracked the approaching submarine. "Bearing 070. Range 6,000 yards and closing fast. I think they're making their attack run." Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she realized that the enemy was about to strike again, and this time they might not be as fortunate as they had been with the first torpedo. Lieutenant Commander Torres studied the tactical display with growing alarm. "Ma'am, if Contact 2 maintains current speed and bearing, they'll be in optimal firing position in less than 3 minutes. And Contact 1 is still out there somewhere, probably reloading for another attack." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, and Sarah knew that decisive action was required to prevent her ship from being caught in a deadly crossfire. "Fire control! What's the status on tubes 3 and 4? Sarah demanded. The weapons officer checked his instruments quickly before responding. "Tubes 3 and 4 are loaded and ready, ma'am. We also have a better firing solution on Contact 2 due to their higher speed and more direct approach." Sarah nodded, knowing that the enemy's aggressive maneuvers had given them an opportunity that might not come again. "Very well. Fire tubes 3 and 4. Full spread, set for acoustic homing." The Valiant shuddered as both torpedoes left their tubes simultaneously, racing through the storm-tossed waters toward the approaching submarine. Sarah watched the weapons display intently, knowing that this salvo represented their best chance to eliminate at least one of the enemy submarines before they could complete their attack. Suddenly, the communications officer called out urgently, "Ma'am, Priority 1 message from Fleet Command. Additional enemy submarines detected moving toward our position. Estimated time of arrival, 45 minutes. USS Fitzgerald and USS John Paul Jones have been dispatched to assist, but they won't arrive for at least 2 hours. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that this engagement was just the beginning of what might be a much larger battle. "Torpedo in the water!" Rodriguez screamed from his station. "Contact 2 has fired. Bearing 070, high-speed screws, range closing rapidly." Sarah felt the familiar sensation of time slowing down as another enemy torpedo raced toward her ship, but this time they had their own torpedoes in the water as well, creating a deadly race to see whose weapons would find their target first. "Emergency turn to port. Deploy all countermeasures," Sarah commanded. The Valiant heeled sharply to the left as the helmsman threw the wheel over, while sailors throughout the ship worked frantically to deploy every defensive measure at their disposal. Acoustic decoys, electronic jammers, and thermal masking devices all activated simultaneously in a desperate attempt to confuse the incoming torpedo. "Our torpedoes are 30 seconds from target," announced the weapons officer. "Enemy torpedo is 2 minutes from impact." Sarah found herself holding her breath as she watched both sets of weapons racing toward their targets through the stormy seas. The outcome of this engagement would likely be determined by which torpedo found its mark first. The bridge crew remained silent except for the steady reports from the sonar operator tracking both sets of weapons. Enemy torpedo is tracking... No, it's turning toward the decoys. Our countermeasures are working, Rodriguez reported with obvious relief. But Sarah knew they weren't safe yet, and her attention remained focused on their own torpedoes as they closed on the enemy submarine. 20 seconds to target, 10 seconds per second. Impact. The sonar operator's voice carried across the bridge just as a tremendous explosion echoed through the water, clearly audible even above the sound of the storm. Direct hit on contact 2, Rodriguez announced. I'm reading massive structural damage and the sounds of a submarine breaking apart. A cheer went up from the bridge crew, but Sarah quickly silenced it. One down, but contact, one is still out there, and we have more submarines heading our way. This is no time to celebrate. She turned to her executive officer, Commander Blake. What's our torpedo inventory status? Blake consulted his damage control board before responding. We have 4 torpedoes remaining, ma'am, but we're also taking a beating from this storm. We've got minor flooding in compartment 3, and the port engine is running rough due to saltwater contamination. Sarah nodded grimly, understanding that they were fighting 2 enemies simultaneously, the submarines and the storm itself. Ma'am, I've re-established contact with Submarine 1, Rodriguez reported. Bearing 270, range 7,000 yards. They appear to be maneuvering for another attack run. Sarah studied the tactical display, trying to anticipate the enemy commander's next move. The submarine captain had seen his partner destroyed, which would likely make him either more cautious or more aggressive. Sarah hoped for caution, but prepared for aggression. Load tubes 1 and 2, Sarah ordered, and prepare for rapid-fire sequence. If that submarine wants another fight, we'll give them one they won't forget. As her crew worked to reload the forward torpedo tubes, Sarah noticed that the storm seemed to be reaching its peak intensity. The Valiant was taking a severe pounding from the waves, but the rough seas might also be affecting the enemy submarine's ability to maintain precise control. Lieutenant Commander Torres approached with a navigation update. Ma'am, the merchant convoy has successfully scattered and is proceeding to various safe harbors. We've accomplished our primary mission of protecting the civilian shipping, but now we need to survive long enough to fight off these additional submarines. Sarah appreciated the reminder of their success, but she knew that the job was far from finished. Contact 1 is increasing speed again, Rodriguez announced. Same bearing, range decreasing to 5,000 yards. I think they're making another torpedo run. Sarah felt her jaw tighten as she prepared for what she hoped would be the final engagement with this particular enemy. They had proven they could destroy a submarine, but doing it again while being battered by a typhoon would test every skill they possessed. Fire control, status report, Sarah demanded. The weapons officer studied his instruments carefully before responding. Good firing solution on contact 1, ma'am. Their aggressive approach is making them easier to track despite the storm interference. Recommend firing as soon as tubes are ready. Sarah nodded, knowing that they needed to strike before the enemy could launch their own attack. Tubes 1 and 2 ready in all respects, came the report from the torpedo room. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would likely determine whether her ship and crew survived this encounter. The enemy submarine was closing rapidly, and she could sense the tension building on the bridge as everyone prepared for the climactic moment of the engagement. Very well, Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly across the bridge despite the howling wind outside. Fire tubes 1 and 2. The Valiant shuddered as both torpedoes left their tubes, beginning their deadly journey through the storm-tossed waters toward the enemy submarine. But even as their weapons raced toward the target, Sarah knew that the enemy would likely fire as well, setting up another deadly race between opposing torpedoes. The next few minutes would test everything her crew had learned about naval warfare, damage control, and survival at sea. The storm continued to rage around them. The enemy submarine was preparing its own attack, and more hostile vessels were approaching their position. Commander Sarah Mitchell stood on the bridge of her ship, watching the tactical display and preparing for the moment when the sea would erupt in flames once again. The USS Valiant's torpedoes raced through the storm-churned waters as Commander Sarah Mitchell watched the tactical display with intense concentration. Around her, the bridge crew maintained their positions despite the ship's violent rolling motion. Each sailor focused on their critical tasks as the final confrontation with the enemy submarine reached its climax. The howling wind and crashing waves seemed to fade into background noise as everyone waited for the outcome of this deadly underwater duel. "Enemy torpedo in the water!" screamed Petty Officer Rodriguez from the sonar station. "Bearing 270. High-speed screws. Range 4,000 yards and closing." Sarah felt her heart race as she realized that both sides had fired simultaneously, creating another deadly race between opposing weapons. The difference this time was that they had fired 2 torpedoes, while the enemy had only fired 1, potentially giving them a tactical advantage. "Time to impact on our torpedoes?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. The weapons officer consulted his instruments quickly before responding. 90 seconds to target, ma'am. The enemy torpedo will reach us in approximately 2 minutes, 15 seconds. Sarah nodded, understanding that they had a narrow window where their weapons would hit first, assuming they found their target. Lieutenant Commander Torres moved to Sarah's side, studying the tactical display with growing concern. "Ma'am, even if we destroy this submarine, we still have those additional contacts approaching from the northeast. Intelligence estimates at least 3 more enemy submarines, and we only have 2 torpedoes remaining after this engagement." Sarah acknowledged the sobering reality of their situation, but she knew they had to deal with one threat at a time. "Deploy countermeasures and prepare for evasive maneuvers," Sarah commanded. "But maintain course until our torpedoes reach their target. We need to give our weapons the best possible chance of success." The ship continued to fight against the mountainous waves as acoustic decoys and electronic countermeasures activated throughout the vessel. The tension on the bridge was palpable as everyone watched the weapons tracks on the tactical Sarah found herself silently counting down the seconds, knowing that the next few moments would determine whether her ship survived to fight another day. The storm seemed to intensify even further, as if nature itself was building to the climactic moment of this underwater battle. 60 seconds to target, announced the weapons officer. Sarah could hear the strain in his voice as he tracked their torpedoes through the interference caused by the storm. The advanced sonar systems aboard the Valiant were working at their limits, trying to maintain contact with both the enemy submarine and their own weapons as they closed the final distance. Suddenly, Rodriguez called out urgently, "Contact 1 is turning hard to starboard. They're trying to evade our torpedoes." Sarah watched as the enemy submarine's course changed dramatically on the tactical display, but she was encouraged to see that their weapons were adjusting their pursuit angle to compensate for the evasive maneuvers. 30 seconds to impact, came the steady report from the weapons station. Sarah gripped the rail tighter as the Valiant rolled heavily to port, a massive wave breaking over the destroyer's bow and sending sheets of water across the bridge windows. Despite the chaos of the storm, her crew remained focused on their duties, each person understanding that their survival depended on professional performance under the most extreme conditions. "Our first torpedo has lost contact," Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying a note of concern. "But the second torpedo is still tracking. Impact in 10 seconds. Sarah held her breath as she watched the final moments of their attack unfold on the sonar display, knowing that everything depended on this single remaining weapon finding its target. The explosion, when it came, was tremendous even through the storm noise. The deep rumble of detonating explosives echoed through the water and into the hull of the Valiant, followed immediately by the unmistakable sounds of a submarine breaking apart under the tremendous pressure of the deep ocean. "Direct hit," Rodriguez shouted. "Contact 1 is destroyed." I'm reading massive structural failure and debris falling toward the ocean floor. A cheer erupted from the bridge crew, but it was quickly cut short as the enemy torpedo continued its deadly approach toward their ship. "Incoming torpedo still tracking," Rodriguez reported grimly. "Range 1,000 yards and closing." Our countermeasures don't seem to be effective against this one. Sarah felt her stomach tighten as she realized that despite their success in destroying the enemy submarine, they might still lose their own ship to the final torpedo. "Emergency turn to port. All ahead flank," Sarah commanded. "Damage control teams prepare for possible impact." Throughout the ship, sailors braced themselves for what might be a devastating explosion that could cripple or destroy their vessel. The next few seconds would determine whether their victory over the enemy submarines would be meaningful or Pyrrhic. 500 yards, 300, the torpedo is passing underneath us, Rodriguez announced with obvious relief. "It's continuing on course without detonating. We're clear." Another cheer went up from the bridge crew. This one allowed to continue as the immediate threat to their ship had passed. But Sarah knew they couldn't celebrate for long as more enemy submarines were still approaching their position. Commander Blake approached with a damage report. "Ma'am, we've taken some structural damage from the storm, but all essential systems are operational. We have 2 torpedoes remaining, and the gun systems are ready for surface engagement if needed." Sarah nodded, grateful that her ship was still capable of fighting despite the battering they had taken from both the enemy and the weather. "Ma'am, message from Fleet Command," announced the communications officer. "The USS Fitzgerald and USS John Paul Jones are 30 minutes out and closing fast. They're asking for a tactical update on our situation." Sarah moved to the radio station knowing that she needed to coordinate with the incoming reinforcements to deal with the approaching enemy submarines. "This is Valiant Actual," Sarah transmitted. "We have destroyed 2 enemy submarines but are tracking at least 3 more contacts approaching from the northeast. We have limited torpedo inventory remaining and request immediate support." She paused, looking out at the storm-tossed seas around them. "Be advised, weather conditions are severe and affecting sonar performance." As if summoned by her words about the weather, a particularly massive wave crashed over the Valiant's bow, sending tons of water cascading across the forward deck. The ship shuddered under the impact, but her sturdy construction and skilled crew kept her fighting through the storm. Sarah felt a surge of pride in her vessel and the sailors who operated her under such challenging conditions. "Contact bearing 045, Rodriguez called out suddenly. "New submarine contact, range 12,000 yards moving at high speed toward our position." Sarah realized that the additional enemy submarines had arrived sooner than expected, and the battle was about to begin again. But this time they would not be fighting alone. "Signal the Fitzgerald and John Paul Jones," Sarah ordered. "Enemy submarines are now in the area. Recommend coordinated attack formation upon their arrival." She turned to study the tactical display, beginning to formulate a plan for dealing with multiple enemy submarines using multiple Allied ships. Lieutenant Commander Torres joined her at the tactical station. "Ma'am, with 3 ships working together, we can establish overlapping sonar coverage and coordinate our attacks more effectively. The enemy submarines won't be able to use the same wolf pack tactics against a properly coordinated task force." Sarah nodded, understanding that their reinforcements would change the tactical balance significantly. As the USS Valiant continued to fight through the storm toward her rendezvous with the other destroyers, Sarah reflected on the engagement they had just survived. Her crew had performed magnificently under extreme conditions, destroying 2 enemy submarines and protecting innocent merchant shipping from attack. The single word that Fleet Command had given her, "engage," had been followed by one of the most intense naval battles in recent memory. The storm was beginning to show signs of weakening, though the seas remained rough and dangerous. In the distance, Sarah could see the running lights of the approaching destroyers, their presence a welcome sight after the solitary battle they had just fought. The enemy submarines were still out there, but now the Valiant would have allies in the fight to secure the vital shipping lanes. As lightning continued to flash across the dark sky and thunder rolled over the churning waters, Commander Sarah Mitchell prepared her ship and crew for the next phase of the battle. The sea had indeed erupted in flames just as Fleet Command's order had predicted, but the USS Valiant had emerged victorious from the fire, ready to continue the fight alongside her sister ships in defense of the freedom of the seas.